Hello? We've had a great morning. We've been out on the shooting range and done all the typical FBI things, and it's really wonderful to be here. Before I bring Henry in to talk to you about AIDS, though, I'd like just a minute to talk to you about Henry. Henry is an 18-year-old hemophiliac who's been infected with the virus that causes AIDS for over 8 years now. Since we went public with his diagnosis in March, things have gotten kind of crazy. Henry, as you've all seen, has been on the cover of Parade magazine, in People magazine, on the Good Morning America and the Today Show. Tomorrow we're flying out to New York to do Sally Jesse Raphael. But before you get the idea that having AIDS is all jet-setting around the country, meeting exciting people, and doing things like this, there's been a bad side to this. Henry was on AZT, and we found out that that doesn't work for him. Then he was on an experimental drug called DDI, and again, we found out that that didn't work for Henry. Then he got pneumonia and a series of drug reactions that kept him pretty sick for a lot of the summer. Most recently, we had him down in Washington, D.C., here at NIH, for an experimental drug protocol that put him in the hospital for a week. We'll find out in a couple of months how that worked. 2 weeks ago, we were in San Diego, and Henry got a staph infection. In 6 hours in the hospital, he managed to run up a $30,000 medical bill. Right now, we've got him on special antibiotics that will hopefully keep him from getting any other infections, but the doctors aren't making any promises at this point. This is a difficult time for Henry. Right now, most people his age are in college. They're planning out their lives and their futures. An awful lot of people with Henry's medical condition are in hospitals, coming to the end of their lives. Henry's decided to take a year off of college, to travel all around the country, to speak to people, to convince them that this is something they need to be aware of, to hope that what has happened to our family won't happen to yours. And now I'd like to introduce my brother, Henry Nichols. Has anyone seen Henry? How many of you know what someone with AIDS looks like? Could everyone who's 16 to 25 stand up? Okay, you can be seated. Well, I have some bad news for you. The fastest growing HIV risk group in the country right now looks exactly like you. Henry?
Now, the reason why we did that is we wanted to make a point. And that point is a government study shows that around half the people my age don't believe you can get AIDS from someone who looks healthy. Any of you who did not know me could not have guessed that I have AIDS, and you can't tell by looking. As of today, more than 118,000 people have died of AIDS. As of today, there have been over 180,000 cases of AIDS, and there are more than 2 million people in this country who are infected with the virus, but who do not yet have AIDS. My age group, 16 to 25, is the fastest growing AIDS risk group there is. When I was born in 1973, my parents did not know that my body lacked the ability to produce a certain protein called factor VIII. Factor VIII is required in the clotting process to stop bleeding. I was diagnosed as having a bleeding disorder called hemophilia at the age of 18 months, and it was not a major problem. The missing protein in my blood could be replaced by using a donated concentrated clotting factor. This donated factor VIII was made from the pooled blood of thousands of donors. Each of the more than 300 times that I suffered from a bleeding episode, it was necessary for me to receive an intravenous infusion of this missing protein. These infusions are not hard to do and they only hurt a little bit. The real pain of hemophilia comes from the cost to treat it. A severe hemophiliac can cost anywhere from $10,000 to $20,000 per month to treat. There are over 20,000 hemophiliacs in this country. I have been infused in emergency rooms of hospitals, in cars we were going on trips, on the side of Mount Marcy, the highest mountain in the Adirondacks, on the front lawn of our house after I lost a bike race with a car, and crossing the Colorado River on our way to the North Rim in the Grand Canyon. And I have the world's record for the strangest places for infusions. Infusions were a real family affair, and everyone learned how to infuse me until I was old enough to infuse myself. We never went anywhere without my infusion kit, because any time I twisted my knee or bumped my leg, I could need an infusion. These injuries were not serious, but if they went untreated, I'd have joint problems when I was older and would not be able to walk. I used to drive my family crazy because, like a lot of other hemophiliacs, I wanted to be just like anyone else. Only there were some things I wasn't allowed to do. Baseball was out. Any head injury is life-threatening to a hemophiliac. Soccer, football, and basketball weren't allowed either because my knees could not take the strain of running. So I learned to climb trees. I always climbed the highest one. I learned to rock climb and backpack and canoe. Sometimes I would need to be infused, but most of the time I could do anything my friends could. Today, we are able to screen blood to determine if the donor may have been exposed to the AIDS virus. In the early 1980s, we could not. Unfortunately for myself and for many others, we were unknowingly exposed to AIDS before AIDS was even a word. As nearly as we can tell, I'd probably been exposed to the AIDS virus when I was around 11 years old. After I was exposed, nothing happened for several years. The virus seems to go through a dormant or quiet period during which the victim appears healthy and doesn't know that he's getting ill. Gradually, your immune system weakens, then you can get an opportunistic infection, and then you have AIDS. It takes the average person 6 to 10 years from the time they are infected until they develop AIDS. The whole time, you are apparently healthy and can infect others. I'm going to take a break from my speaking to show you some slides about me and my life and help you pretty much just get to know me and AIDS patients a little bit better. Aha! This is me and my father. I'm the cute one with the 2 black eyes. Well, all right, for this one, when I was little, you have to understand I was quite stubborn. And one day I got into an argument with this car. Actually, it wasn't really an argument, it was more of a battle. This was my weapon. This is me and my bike after the battle. As you can see, I had a broken leg, crushed ankle, and a shattered tooth. I was in intensive care for about 3 weeks, and then they put me in, guess what? The cast from hell. By the time I was 11 years old, I had learned not to argue with cars anymore, but I was still frequently being infused. I averaged around 1 infusion a week during this time in my life, and this is most likely when I was exposed to the AIDS virus. This is a bump I had on my forehead, and this was one reason why I was being infused. I don't even remember how I got this bump, but you have to understand, when I was little, my sister you met there, they abused me. Everyone had to learn how to infuse me until I was old enough to infuse myself. They used to enjoy sticking me, and they drew lots to see who could have the pleasure of doing it next. My mother most frequently did my infusions, and I liked her the best because she was good. She had the most practice, and she hardly ever missed a vein. This is Factor VIII. It is a freeze-dried concentrate. It is expensive, but it is easy and fast to use. We liked it a lot better than some of the alternatives. We didn't know that each time I was infused with this product, I was getting the blood of around 20,000 different donors, and had a very high risk of exposure to the AIDS virus. We had to keep careful records of my infusions because that was one way we could determine when I had been exposed to the AIDS virus. This is a Harold book. It should have been named Henry. Harold was a hemophiliac who could do normal things because he used Factor VIII. When I was little, I wanted to be just like Harold because he was normal. We used to read lots of things about hemophilia. We had all the Harold books. This is some light reading about hemophilia that my parents suggested my friends and teachers read. Now, before you met me or before I came here, you probably had all sorts of ideas and conceptions about how people with AIDS or AIDS patients live and what they look like. Well, I've had AIDS for over a year now and been infected for close to 9 years, and I'd like to show you a little bit about how I live and what I do. I swim, snorkel, scuba dive. I've hiked over 100 miles in the Grand Canyon in 100-degree heat with a 50-pound pack, where the nearest shower or cold drink was a 2-day hike away. AIDS patients can climb Mount Katahdin, the highest mountain in Maine, in 40-mile-an-hour winds. I have climbed on the Matterhorn in Switzerland. This is a very serious climb. Last year we tried to climb the Matterhorn. Many people die trying to climb this mountain, and by August of 1990, there had been over 14 fatalities that year alone. This is what the mountains looked like on the morning when we woke up. We had climbed above the clouds and had an ice storm at around 11,000 feet, and we could go no higher. It was an act of nature, not of AIDS, that prevented me from reaching the summit of the Matterhorn. We returned from the Matterhorn in September of 1990. 2 months later, I was diagnosed as having AIDS. Until the first week of March of this year, I never told anyone that I had AIDS. I never told my best friend, my girlfriend, my teachers, my relatives. I couldn't because I was afraid. If I had cancer or leukemia or any one of 100 other life-threatening illnesses, I could have told anyone. And except for support and sympathy, there would have been very little reaction. But AIDS is different. People are afraid of AIDS. People are afraid of AIDS patients. AIDS patients, we are afraid too. We are afraid of the public and private reaction to this disease. AIDS patients, like myself, often fail to seek treatment for fear of someone discovering the terrible secret that they have AIDS. So they will go untreated and will die unnecessarily. About 40,000 people with AIDS this year will develop a type of pneumonia called PCP. Between 2,000 and 12,000 of these people are going to die. This type of pneumonia is largely preventable if your doctor knows you are at risk. AIDS patients who are afraid to tell their doctors about their status are endangering their lives. AIDS patients like me often fail to seek the support and comfort of friends and family. They are afraid they might be rejected by someone they love or someone who loves them, so they will die alone without the love and support they need. Since I've gone public with my diagnosis, we have received thousands of letters from families across the country. Many families had very personal stories. One husband and wife never told anyone that their son died of AIDS. I know a 17-year-old boy who has not told his father he's HIV positive. AIDS is a very difficult burden for anyone to carry, and no one should ever have to carry that burden alone. But many people try and live with AIDS alone because they are unwilling to expose themselves and their families to the prejudice of a community that does not understand. While I am unwilling to remain silent, I did nothing to deserve this disease, and no one could ever deserve AIDS. There's no such thing as a guilty or an innocent victim. AIDS victims are all victims, and we are all victims of AIDS. I am not a danger to my community. AIDS is a very difficult disease to catch. There are only 3 ways you could get AIDS. You could be born to a mother who is infected, you could have unprotected sex with an infected person, or you could have direct blood-to-blood contact, such as through IV needles or blood products, with an infected person. Today, the fastest growing AIDS risk group is 16 to 25-year-olds. Many in my age group do not believe that AIDS is a problem for them. There's a dangerous sense of invulnerability, of immortality that I see in my classmates and peers. Most of us already are or will become sexually active. Some of us will experiment with alcohol and other drugs. Both put us at risk for AIDS. Anyone who's sexually active and practices unprotected sex is at risk for AIDS. Anyone who uses IV drugs is at risk for AIDS. No one deserves AIDS. No one should have to suffer from AIDS and the ignorance of friends, family, and community. My speaking project is not about AIDS. It's about compassion, understanding, and love. It is time we demystify AIDS as a disease. Knowledge will make the difference, and I need your help. There are lots of sources of information that are accurate about AIDS. You can contact the Red Cross or support groups for information. AIDS isn't a gay disease or a drug addict's disease. This most certainly isn't my disease. AIDS is our disease. As leaders in this and other communities, you have a responsibility to be sure that AIDS patients are treated appropriately. You have the power to help shape public opinions and attitudes. You can make people realize that AIDS jokes are not okay. Today in this country, there are over 180,000 AIDS patients. There are 1.5 to 2 million people who are infected with the virus, but who do not yet have AIDS. The public cost of treating these people will be billions of dollars. You have a responsibility to help others understand the risks of AIDS and the myths. You can't get AIDS from a drinking fountain or a soda bottle, or sharing food, or being in any normal routine activity with an AIDS patient. AIDS is not a threat to you or your families or your communities. Ignorance is. You have seen what I'm doing to fight AIDS. I can't do this alone. I've been treated with compassion, respect, and understanding everywhere I've gone, but this does not happen everywhere. AIDS patients in this country are still grossly discriminated against. Last month, a woman in Pennsylvania, where I was speaking, refused to speak from the same microphone that I used. No one has ever caught AIDS from a microphone. AIDS may not be dangerous, but that woman sure was. There are a lot of people who need to learn the facts about AIDS. There's a lot to do and a lot to learn, but there's very little time. If we are going to beat AIDS before AIDS beats us, it will take the combined effort of all of us. You not only need to change the way you think around AIDS patients and about AIDS patients, you need to change your behaviors and take responsibility for your actions. The number of people my age who are being infected with AIDS every year is doubling. Remember those statistics I quoted? 180,000 AIDS patients, 1.5 to 2 million people infected with the virus. I am part of that statistic. I do not want anyone I know or anyone I love to become part of that toll. Thousands of people will die from this disease. Please don't let yourself become one of them. If I am the first person with AIDS that you have ever met, you are lucky. I will not be the last. Thank you.